Mr. Peterson had allowed Lily to stay behind to finish her essay. Her pen scratched across the paper, the sound unnaturally loud in a quiet classroom. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds, casting long shadows across the desks. She paused, twirling a strand of dark hair around her finger as she considered her final sentence. The essay prompt stared back at her from the top of the page. Describe a time when you faced your greatest fear. Trouble was, Lily didn't feel like she'd ever been able to face any of her fears. She just didn't know what they were, or how to find them. She certainly felt the odd one out. Suddenly, she heard a sound from outside in the corridor, and she glanced up, freakishly alert. The classroom was empty, the other students having left as soon as the bell rang. The clock on the wall now ticked noisily, the pauses between each tick seeming to lengthen unnaturally. Shaking off the feeling, Lily returned to her work. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Darkness engulfed the room, so thick and sudden it felt like a physical force. Lily's breath caught in her throat, the sound swallowed by the unnatural quiet. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, fingers unsteady, refusing to light up no matter how many times she pressed the power button. A crackle pierced the silence, making her jolt. The school's tannoy system came to life, soft classical music drifting through the air. Lily's muscles tensed, her body coiled and ready. As she listened, the melody began to warp, the once soothing notes twisting into something sinister and mocking. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the music descended into chaos, discordant tones screeching through the speakers. Lily rose to her feet, her movements fluid despite the darkness. Her fingers trailed along the edge of the desk, using it to orient herself in the pitch-black room. "Hello?" she called out, her voice tight and controlled. "Is anyone there?" The tannoy crackled again, and a voice that was decidedly not the principal's oozed through the speakers.
"Run, Lily,"
it purred, a hint of amusement in its tone.
"The hunger grows stronger."
Lily's breath quickened, but not entirely from fear. There was an undercurrent of excitement, a thrill that she quickly tamped down. This wasn't the time for that. Not yet. She moved swiftly to the door, her fingers closing around the cold metal handle. She yanked it open and slipped into the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. Dim emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie glow that did little to illuminate her path. Lily's pace increased, her breathing sharp and controlled. Her eyes darted from side to side, taking in every detail of the transformed school corridor. The lockers, usually a mundane backdrop to teenage life, now loomed ominously. Their metal surfaces seemed to ripple in the wavering light, creating the illusion of movement where there should be none. A bone-chilling thud reverberated through the corridor, the impact shaking the lockers. Lily paused, pressing herself against the wall, every muscle taut. Another thud followed, closer this time. Something was coming. The tannoy crackled once more.
"It's getting closer, Lily. Can you hear it?"
The voice taunted, an undercurrent of excitement in its tone. Lily's legs propelled her forward, rounding a corner at breakneck speed. The emergency lights above her head exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging her into darkness once more. She halted, her senses straining in the blackness. The acrid smell of burnt wires filled her nostrils, mixing with something else, a damp, organic scent that made her stomach churn. In that moment of stillness, she became aware of a sound underneath her rapid breathing and pounding heart, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The hairs on her arms stood on end as she felt something brush against her in the dark. Lily bit back a cry, her nails digging into her palms. A flicker of light illuminated the hallway for a split second, and Lily caught a glimpse of her pursuer. A massive, grotesque form loomed behind her, its body a twisted mass of writhing tentacles and glistening, oily skin. The sight should have terrified her, should have sent her spiraling into panic. Instead, Lily felt a surge of something else, a wild, primal excitement that she struggled to suppress. Not yet, she told herself firmly. The game wasn't over. Lily's breath hitched, her body trembling with intensity. She darted down the hallway, slipping into the first open door she found. The creature crashed against it, the impact reverberating through her body. She braced herself against the door, feeling it buckle under the monster's assault.
The hunger grows stronger, Lily. Time is running out.
The voice on the tannoy warned, somehow audible even through the thick wooden door. Lily's eyes darted around the room, recognizing it as one of the science labs. Beakers and test tubes lined the shelves, their contents casting strange shadows in the dim light. As she backed away from the door, her hip bumped against one of the lab tables, sending a rack of test tubes crashing to the floor. The acrid smell of chemicals filled the air, making Lily's eyes water. But beneath the sharp scent, another odor caught her attention. It was faint, but unmistakable. The metallic tang of blood. Her nostrils flared, drinking in the scent, and she felt something stir deep within her. The creature slammed against the door again, jolting Lily into action. She sprinted towards the back of the room, her eyes scanning for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze fell on a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Without hesitation, she grabbed it, the weight of it comforting in her hands. Just as she turned back towards the door, it splintered open. The monster burst into the room, its massive tentacles and eyes undulating in a nauseating display. Lily raised the fire extinguisher, her fingers finding the pin. "Come on then," she snarled, a hint of something inhuman creeping into her voice. "Let's dance." She pulled the pin and squeezed the handle, sending a powerful jet of foam directly into the creature's face. It reeled back, screeching in pain and confusion. Lily didn't waste a second. She darted past the creature, using its momentary disorientation to her advantage. She burst into another hallway, the creature's fetid breath hot on her neck. The tannoy's music reached a frenzied crescendo, the chaotic notes matching the pounding of her heart. She could see the school's main entrance ahead, a glimmer of promise in the darkness. With a final burst of speed, Lily reached the doors. She slammed into them, throwing her whole body against the push bar. For one heart-stopping moment, they didn't budge. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, they swung open. Cool night air hit her face as Lily stumbled out into the parking lot. Her frantic flight slowed to a jog, then a walk. Behind her, she could hear the creature thrashing inside the school, its roars a mix of fury and frustration. An eerie calm settled over her as a cruel laugh bubbled up from her throat, starting as a quiet chuckle and growing louder with each step. It was a chilling sound, filled with a wild, primal energy that seemed to resonate with the very air around her. The laughter grew, becoming more unhinged with each passing second. Lily stopped walking and slowly turned to face the school, her body vibrating with barely contained energy. The creature appeared in the doorway, its massive form silhouetted against the flickering lights inside. It hesitated, sensing the change in its prey. The tables had turned, and the hunter was about to become the hunted. Lily's lips curled into a grin, stretching wider and wider until it seemed to split her face. Her eyes, once wide and alert, now gleamed with predatory delight. The mask of the frightened schoolgirl fell away, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath.
"Oh, you poor thing,"
Lily cooed, her voice dripping with mock sympathy.
"Did you really think you were the hunter here? How delightfully naive."
Her form began to shift and contort, growing larger and more monstrous with each passing second. Her limbs elongated, fingers stretching into razor-sharp claws. The creature, now more confused than menacing, took a step back.
What's wrong?
Lily taunted, her voice distorting into something inhuman.
Isn't this what you wanted?
With a squeal of pure, unhinged joy, Lily launched herself at the monster. Her movements were blindingly fast, nothing like the cautious girl from moments before. She collided with the creature, engulfing it in a mass of writhing shadows and otherworldly limbs. The monster's shocked, desperate screams echoed through the empty school. The parking lot was plunged into an unnatural darkness as Lily enveloped her prey. Inside the school, the tannoy crackled one last time.
Well done, my dear.
The voice purred, thick with pride and satisfaction.
You've passed your final exam with flying colours.
She had done it. She had finally embraced her true nature. She stood there, panting like the visceral creature she now was. But by living as a human for so long, by experiencing their fears and desires, she had gained a powerfully unique perspective, an understanding. Lily's gaze now turned to the town beyond the school grounds, two distinct urges warring within her. Destruction or control, hunter or hunted. The choice, she realized, was now hers to make. When we first arrived at the camp, our spirits were high, and we laughed and chatted as we walked through the golden leaves that had recently fallen. It was early autumn, and though the mornings were brisk, the afternoons brought a crisp golden warmth that made the endless rows of trees stunningly beautiful. We were a 20-man strong mining group, hired in to dig the frozen earth and unearth the veins of silver rumored to be buried there. The camp was rough, a cluster of wooden cabins hastily built against the encroaching cold. We worked hard by day, the only sounds were the slam of metal against earth, but the nights were filled with friendly banter. Joe, a stout burly man with a beard like a grizzly's, always had the best stories or jokes to keep us entertained. And Carter, wiry and quick-witted, would chime in with a snarky remark that sent us into fits of belly laughter. Even the foreman, a hard-nosed bastard called Briggs, seemed to relax in those first few weeks. Takoda, the Indigenous guide who lived on the edge of the camp, was the only one who seemed uneasy. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was always the same warning. Respect the forest. Take only what you need. Yes, yes, we all muttered. That's the plan. But then we struck a huge vein of silver, and our intentions changed. In mid-November, the first snowstorm hit, making our work far more difficult as the ground froze harder and our numb fingers struggled to hold our battered tools. The isolation also began to slowly creep in. Supply runs became infrequent, and the silver deposits the earth had tantalizingly promised were harder to find than expected. The forest, once a backdrop to our work, started to feel like it was closing in on us. The dark, dense trees so thickly close that hardly any light could penetrate through them. Joe joked about it one night, slapping Carter on the back. You scared of a few trees, Carter? Maybe the big bad wolves will get you. Carter grinned, but said nothing. I noticed he had started carrying his rifle, even when he didn't need to. Nerves began to fray as our imaginations began to play with us. The first real sign that something was wrong came a week later, when Joe didn't return after his shift. He'd been out checking the equipment by the southern edge of the camp, a routine job he'd done dozens of times before. When the sun set and Joe hadn't returned, Briggs sent a few of us to look for him. We found his tracks leading into the forest, but then they stopped suddenly, as if he'd simply vanished. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just the eerie, empty quiet of the trees. We came back none the wiser, and that night the camp was unusually quiet. No jokes, no laughter, just the distant sound of the wind through the trees, and something else, faint and far off, A guttural howl. Takoda, our guide, heard it too. I'll never forget the way his face paled as he muttered a single word under his breath. Wendigo. The next dark morning, Briggs dismissed the guide's warning and we set off to look for him again. Joe probably got turned around in the dark, he said. We'll find him as the sun breaks. But we didn't. When we returned, we noticed Carter was also missing and found his rifle lying in the snow outside his cabin. This time, there were signs of a struggle. Long claw marks raked across the cabin wall and blood frozen in the snow. The guide gathered us that night by the fire. You've taken too much from this land, he said, his voice trembling. The Wendigo has come. It feeds on greed, on those who consume more than they need. Most of the men scoffed, even though they looked uneasy, but I couldn't shake the grip of fear in my gut. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my cabin. At first, I thought it was Joe, but when I peered out of the window, I saw something else. It stood just beyond the edge of the forest line, tall and skeletal, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its head tilted as if it could see me watching. I slammed closed the shutters and pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding. It wasn't human, but what was it? The next day, Briggs was gone. His cabin was empty, the door torn from its hinges. The men were terrified, muttering about wolves or bears, but I knew better. So did the guide. We have to leave, he said. Now. Briggs was the only one who could authorize us to abandon the operation, and without him, the men hesitated. The silver was still out there, and despite everything, the lure of wealth was too strong for some of them to walk away. That night, the howls came again, louder this time, closer. Takoda stayed with me, and we made a plan. He told me that the Wendigo couldn't be killed, not by bullets, not by knives, but it could be trapped, bound within a circle of ash and fire. It wasn't much, but it was our only option. We spent the next day gathering wood and marking the ground with ash from the campfire. The others watched but didn't help, their faces sullen and fearful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the deathly quiet of the forest was gradually replaced by a low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then it stepped into the clearing. The Wendigo was even more grotesque up close. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes burned with a malevolent light. But what froze me in place was its face. It had Joe's face, but now his features were twisted and his mouth stretched unnaturally wide to reveal rows of jagged, broken teeth. I stumbled back as Takoda shouted for me to light the fire. My hand shook as I struck the match, the flame catching on the woodpile we prepared. The fire roared to life, and the Wendigo screamed, a sound that tore through the night like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. It lunged at us, but stopped just short of the circle of ash. Takoda began chanting, his voice steady even as the creature thrashed against the invisible barrier. For a moment, I thought we'd won. But then, the whispers started. They were faint at first, just a soft murmur at the edge of my mind. But as the guide's chanting grew louder, so did the voices. They called my name, begging, pleading, accusing. You brought this, they said. You took too much. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the whispers grew deafening. Takoda tried to pull me back, but the Wendigo lunged again, and this time, the barrier gave way. The last thing I remember is Takoda shoving me towards the forest, his voice breaking as he screamed, "Run!" I don't know how long I ran. The trees blurred together, the cold biting at my skin. When I finally stopped, the camp was gone, and so was Takoda. I collapsed in the snow. A passing truck found me the next morning, half frozen and delirious. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. It's been many, many months, but sometimes at night, I hear the howls again. They're faint, but they're there, echoing in the back of my mind. And when I look in the mirror, I often catch a glimpse of someone or something else. For now, I can control it, but something deep inside me knows I'm not strong enough to fight it forever. To survive that night, I had to leave something behind in that forest. The question is, how long before it comes to collect the rest? I was known as the man who had everything, especially when it came to gaming. My elderly parents, so grateful to have a child at all, had always buckled to my fractious demands and given me whatever I wanted when I was a kid. The latest consoles and devices, the newest releases, the most expensive setups, all demanded, never earned. My parents' attempts to teach me about earning my rewards were met with calculated tantrums that always ended with them giving in. And as for gratitude, nothing they did ever made me feel it. As an adult, I now earn vast sums of money designing games, so I either got free kit or simply bought myself whatever I wanted. From a small boy, I didn't like anyone having anything better than I did. At school, I reduced my bestie, Tommy Parker, to tears because his parents could only afford the previous year's console. I filmed it on my phone and posted it online. Better ask Santa for some real gaming gear, I sneered, watching him try to hide his second-hand controller. The video went viral in our school. Tommy stopped coming to classes that week, and he also stopped being my friend. I told myself it was funny. After all, if his parents really cared, they'd buy him better stuff, right? He wasn't my only victim at school. Sarah Chen's handheld console accidentally ended up in a puddle after she beat my high score, and Mark Rodriguez's collectible game cards mysteriously vanished after he refused to trade his rare ones to me. I was the king of my digital domain, and everyone else was just a non-player character in my world. These days I had outgrown the childish pranks, but also there didn't seem to be anyone around me to prank on, let alone friends. I had moved back into my parents' old house a few years ago. They had both passed away, and I decided I might as well go back to the old place. After all, it still housed all the kit I'd ever bought, and it was like a techie museum. Nothing much changed in our street, but some new neighbors called the Wilsons had moved in over the road a few weeks ago. They were everything I hated. Cheerful, generous, always helping others. Mr. Wilson spent his evenings helping elderly neighbors with their Christmas lights. Mrs. Wilson organized the neighborhood charity drive, collecting gifts for kids who couldn't afford a proper Christmas. Kids like Tommy, I realized with a smirk. Their house quickly became a beacon of Christmas spirit, covered in stunning handcrafted decorations that made my small tokenistic LED display look hollow in comparison. Looking up occasionally from my computer screen, I would catch sight of them through the window as they warmly welcomed whatever needy or poor person was knocking at their front door. The package arrived a week before Christmas. No return address, just my name in strange frost-like letters that shimmered daintily in the porch light. The wrapping paper was the deepest crimson red, marked with symbols that seemed to burn into my retinas if I looked at them too long. Attached was a note, written in the same shimmering script, for a man who needs to learn how it feels to be played. I tore up the note with the disdain it deserved and wondered what sort of new marketing ploy this was. I ripped off the thick paper and opened the plain cardboard box. Inside was a console unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Deepest matte black, with intricate patterns like frozen icicles across its surface. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, and its sleep mode power light pulsed red like a beating heart. The controller felt exquisitely balanced and exotic in my hands, like it was made of ice that molded to my touch, yet couldn't melt. So, whilst the neighborhood slept under its blanket of Christmas lights, I pressed the power button on. Instead of the usual startup animation, the screen stayed black for several long seconds, then static. Then utter brilliant clarity flashed up. What I saw made me drop both my jaw and the controller. There was Mr. Wilson's living room, exactly as I'd seen it through their window earlier that day, the Christmas tree lights pulsing softly in the corner. Everything was in perfect detail, like I was watching a reality TV show. A crosshair floated in the center of the screen, glowing faintly red. When I picked up the controller again and experimentally moved the joystick, I watched Mr. Wilson shuffle around in his Christmas pajamas, his movements slightly stiff and robotic. Each movement he made was perfect, precise, matching exactly what motion I made on that eerily cold controller. I tried to make Mr. Wilson do a much more complex movement and open his curtains. As I admired the way he smoothly drew back the thick tapestried material, my attention was distracted by a bright beam of light suddenly appearing from over the road. I peered outside, and I could see Mr. Wilson's hand lit up, resting on his curtain. How odd. He had pulled back his curtains at exactly the same time I had made him do it in the game. I looked back at my screen, and the icy controller moved deliciously in my hand as I got him to close the curtain. The shaft of light over the road disappeared. So I repeated the action. The same response over the road. Light billowed out, his hand clearly outlined as he performed the command. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a game. This was control. Real, perfect control over another human being. And the rush it gave me was better than anything I had ever known. At first, I tested the waters cautiously. Made him go to fix a midnight snack. Made him stub his toe on a chair. But as the night wore on, my actions grew bolder. I made him knock over his beautifully decorated Christmas tree, made him delete the charity drive spreadsheets from his computer. Watching him cut up the Santa suit he was supposed to wear the next day for the neighborhood kids was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. The power was intoxicating. Every click of a button, every push of the joystick made him dance to my tune. Days passed, and I grew more daring. Watching him both on and off screen, snapping at carolers and telling off charity volunteers. I watched through the screen as confusion and fear grew in Mrs. Wilson's eyes, as neighbors started whispering behind their hands. Christmas Day was when I went too far. I was alone again this year, a not uncommon situation for me. The Wilsons had invited the neighborhood's less fortunate families for a traditional festive dinner. I watched them arriving and saw in surprise Tommy's family turn up. I hadn't seen them since our school days. They looked worn out and depressed. After they all left, I watched smugly through the screen as Mrs. Wilson confronted her husband about the sabotaged charity gifts and his increasingly erratic behavior. Mr. Wilson's confusion had me crying with laughter. I made him scream manically in her face, made him tell her how stupid her Christmas spirit was, how pathetic she was for caring about worthless families like Tommy's. When she fearfully threatened to call the police, I made him grab her. I didn't mean to hold quite so hard, or necessarily by the throat, but in the heat of the moment, I forgot this wasn't just another game, and my hands moved the controller with a life of their own. Exhausted now, my eyes closed as I stretched back into my state-of-the-art gaming chair and slept. I awoke suddenly, startled by the sound of sirens. Mrs. Wilson lay limp on the front lawn, amongst the debris of broken decorations. Mr. Wilson stood mutely by. He made no explanation, spoke no defense. I watched them lead him away, his Christmas pajamas covered in mud, while the neighbors, the same ones he'd helped with Christmas lights just days ago, filmed it on their phones. His confusion, his terror, it all went viral. I told myself it was just another cutscene game sequence. It had no real consequences. Idly, it occurred to me again that I had zero idea where this console was from, who had made it, or who had sent it to me. Tonight, as Christmas carols drift through my window, I sit next to the glowing console, in front of the dim screen. I wonder if I will be able to control Mr. Wilson now he's in a prison cell. I move the joystick, but instead of a game menu popping up, I see dozens of images, like a wall of security feeds. In one, Mr. Wilson rocks back and forth in his cell, mumbling about being possessed. In another, Tommy Parker sits alone in his room, too afraid to go out. I witness Mrs. Wilson's sister packing up their Christmas decorations, crying. A collection of lives I've ruined, playing on endless repeat. And, in the center screen, I see myself. My hands fly across the keyboard, manically typing words, but I'm not controlling them. I've been typing for hours, days, years. The security feed shares news items showing time passing, trials, convictions, lives destroyed. But in my gaming room, it's always Christmas Day. Sometimes the screens show me what could have been. Mr. Wilson teaching his grandchildren how to build snowmen. Mrs. Wilson retiring from a lifetime of charity work. Tommy becoming a successful musician, happily married with 2 kids. All these futures I erased, playing out like alternative save files I can never access. The console's red power light pulses steadily, marking time in my eternal Christmas Day. I can't turn it off, can't look away, can't stop typing these confessions that no one will ever read. My punishment isn't being controlled, it's being forced to watch on eternal repeat what I've done, to witness every life I've damaged, every future I've corrupted, playing out in perfect high-definition detail. The screen flickers, and I see a young woman plugging in the new matte black console, covered in a familiar frozen design, her face filled with the same cruel excitement I once felt. My hands start typing again, desperate to warn her, but I know it's pointless. Some games don't end, even when you've had enough of them, and it seemed this game would never end at all.